12 years. That's how long I'd given to that company. 12 years of late nights, early mornings, and weekends lost to strategy meetings and product deadlines. So when I saw the subject line, organizational restructuring, please confirm meeting, my heart didn't skip a beat. It slowed, just enough for me to know something wasn't right. The meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m., sharp, a Wednesday, just 3 days before the company's highly publicized launch party, one I had spent the last 9 months orchestrating down to the smallest detail. I walked into the conference room exactly on time. The atmosphere was thick with pretense. Kevin from HR sat to the left, fake sympathy practically dripping from his pores. Across from him sat Andrew Harper, the freshly appointed CEO who had taken over 6 weeks ago. No history with the company. No loyalty to its people. Just sharp suits, LinkedIn buzzwords, and a plan to optimize performance. "Isabel, thanks for coming in," Andrew said, folding his hands on the table like he was about to offer me a promotion, not a pink slip. I smiled politely and sat down. "Of course." "We'll get straight to it," Kevin began. "In line with our new structural alignment, your role as Director of Brand Strategy is being phased out. The executive team appreciates your years of dedication, but the decision is final." Andrew didn't blink. He just added, "You've been a valuable contributor, Isabel, but we're building a leaner, more agile team." Valuable, leaner, phased out. I glanced at the termination papers Kevin slid across the table. 12 years distilled into 3 printed pages, a severance that barely acknowledged my time or value. I could have cried, could have raised my voice, demanded an explanation, but I didn't, because I already knew this was coming. 3 weeks earlier, I had walked into the office late one night after forgetting my laptop. That's when I saw it. An open email on Andrew's screen. He'd left in a hurry. The subject line read, "Isabel off the launch list. Replacement confirmed." I only needed a few seconds to read enough. It was dated a full month before any restructuring was announced. So I began preparing. Quietly, carefully, strategically. "I understand," I said now, my voice calm. "These decisions are never easy." They seemed almost disappointed by my composure, as if they were hoping for an outburst to make their job easier. Instead, I signed the papers, thanked them for their time, and stood to leave. "Oh, one more thing," Kevin said. "Per policy, your final day will be Friday. You won't need to attend the launch party." I almost laughed. Won't need to attend? I had built the launch from scratch, designed every invite, curated the guest list, and even booked the venue myself. And now, 3 days before, they were uninviting me from my own event? I nodded. Understood. But I had no intention of missing it. Back at my apartment that night, I opened my laptop and looked over the document I'd been refining ever since I saw that email. It wasn't just a resignation letter or a legal complaint. It was a timeline, a chronologically ordered list of every campaign, product, and brand milestone that I had led or built from the ground up. Each entry included names, proof, file backups, and emails. And at the bottom of that document, a copyright certificate. Because 9 months ago, when the launch theme was still an idea on a whiteboard, I had pitched something bold, a new branding language, tagline, and visual system for the product. They loved it, until Andrew took over and stopped inviting me to creative meetings. What they didn't realize? I had filed for copyright of the full launch identity under my own name, as the original creator on personal time using my own tools. Legal, clean, traceable. I saved the document as a PDF titled Launch Gift, Isabel.pdf, and attached it to a scheduled email. The recipient? Andrew Harper. Delivery time? 9:30 p.m., precisely 20 minutes after his toast at the launch party. I smiled to myself as I hit schedule. Let them have their champagne, their applause, their hollow words, because I wasn't just walking out. I was going to make sure they remembered me. By Thursday morning, the office buzzed with launch party energy. Florists delivering centerpieces, interns rushing around with gift bags, and marketing leads reviewing press kits for the 200-plus guests expected to attend. TechVision's rebrand was about to go live, and the buzzword of the week was transformative. No one looked twice at me. That was the beauty of being invisible after they've decided you're already gone. I still had access to the internal comm system, the project management dashboards. Everything. They hadn't revoked a thing. Andrew didn't even bother speaking to me again. He was too busy being photographed for business magazines, flanked by people half my age and twice as loud. Every time I walked past the glass conference rooms where they gathered, I saw my work, my branding, my copy, my entire concept, splashed across the screens like it had been conjured from the heavens. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was patient. Thursday afternoon, I received an email from the event coordinator confirming the final guest list and media rundown. I hadn't been removed from the CC list yet. Sloppy. Scrolling through, I saw the names of dozens of industry leaders, influencers, and investors. People who remembered me as the voice behind TechVision's most successful campaigns. People who would definitely recognize my signature creative style when they saw it unveiled. But most importantly, I saw the name of Lucas Bain, founder of Bain & Ford, the largest investment firm tied to TechVision's future funding. Lucas was a serious man with little patience for legal drama or intellectual property scandals. I had met him twice at industry conferences. Once, years ago, he'd pulled me aside to compliment a campaign I'd developed. "You've got the kind of mind that makes people pay attention," he'd said. Now, I'd make sure he had every reason to. That night, I reviewed the launch schedule. Andrew was set to give his toast at 9:10 p.m., followed by the unveiling of the new branding on a massive screen that wrapped around the room. 9:30 p.m. was the moment everything would change. The document I'd prepared, launchgiftisabel.pdf, was more than just a list. It was a dossier. It outlined the development of TechVision's new visual identity, traced to meetings that occurred before my dismissal, backed by time-stamped drafts and Slack messages where I'd proposed the key ideas. It included the copyright registration, filed 4 days before Andrew even joined the company. It also referenced internal messages where Andrew dismissed my role as a creative we can afford to lose. The best part? It wasn't sent just to him. The scheduled email was set to deliver simultaneously to TechVision's board of directors, Lucas Bain, 3 top-tier tech journalists, and my own lawyer, Samantha Cho, who had drafted a cease and desist letter attached to the file. I had also scheduled a LinkedIn post to go live at 9:35 p.m., summarizing my 12 years at TechVision and my decision to protect my work after being dismissed. Not bitter, not petty, just factual, respectful, and backed by proof. Friday morning arrived. I dressed carefully in a black satin blouse and tailored suit. Understated but sharp. My access badge still worked, and no one questioned me as I walked through the front lobby of the upscale Midtown hotel hosting the party. I blended in easily, just another executive among executives. Champagne glasses clinked. Waiters floated past with truffle canapes. Guests posed against branded backdrops I had designed. It was surreal. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. At exactly 9:09 p.m., Andrew climbed the stage with the confidence of a man who thought he had built his kingdom from scratch. Spotlights warmed his face as he raised his glass. "Everything you see here," he began, voice booming, "is thanks to our incredible team. Every sleepless night, every innovation, every ounce of creativity. Well, except for the dead weight we let go along the way." The crowd chuckled uneasily. Some glanced at me. Others raised their glasses with artificial smiles. I stood up, walked calmly to the stage, and handed him a thin white envelope. He faltered. "What's this?" I leaned in, voice just loud enough to be picked up by nearby microphones. "Your surprise launch gift." Then I turned, walked out of the ballroom, and left them with the countdown ticking. At 9:30 p.m., the notifications began. Emails were delivered. Phones started buzzing. One journalist tweeted a screenshot of the copyright certificate. By 9:32 p.m., Lucas Bain was already dialing his phone. 10 minutes later, chaos erupted. By the time I reached the sidewalk outside the hotel, I could already feel the shift in the air. Inside, the music was still playing, the waiters still circulating, but the mood had turned. The moment my email landed, it tore through the launch like a silent missile. Polite in tone, legal in wording, but devastating in impact. What had been a celebration was now unraveling in real time. I didn't look back. Instead, I slid into a black car waiting across the street. The driver, sent by Samantha, my attorney, nodded silently and pulled away. My phone lit up as we crossed Park Avenue. 10:02 p.m. Samantha. Everything's moving. Bain is furious. Board's already calling an emergency session. Beautiful timing. I stared out the window as the city glowed around me, my thoughts drifting back to the beginning. Back to when TechVision wasn't even called that. It was a scrappy startup, and I was one of the first 10 employees. We'd worked out of a co-working space that smelled like burnt coffee and cheap ambition. I remembered our founder, Daniel Shaw. He was the reason I stayed as long as I did. He believed in people. He listened. He made sure credit was given where it was earned. He passed away 4 years ago. And after that, the company changed. Andrew Harper came in with shiny teeth, perfect suits, and a string of buzzword-laced TED talks. The board thought he was the future. I was just a reminder of the past. They never expected the past to fight back. 10:11 p.m. Miguel. What did you do? Andrew just stormed off stage. PR team is in panic mode. Investors are demanding answers. Miguel had been one of my allies in the marketing team. Quiet, sharp, and loyal. I hadn't told him everything, but I had warned him something big was coming. 10:14 p.m. LinkedIn. Your post has received 3,258 reactions and 987 comments in 44 minutes. I opened it and read some of the top responses. This is why we document everything. Well done, Isabel. 12 years of brilliance dismissed. You deserved better. This is the kind of quiet strength we should all aspire to. The validation felt surreal. After years of being told to tone it down and let the team shine, I was finally being seen. Not for the politics I avoided, but for the work I had done. Back at the hotel, the fallout deepened. Samantha forwarded me a recording from a contact inside the boardroom. One of the assistants had left their phone recording on the table by accident. The audio was scratchy, but the voices were clear. Board member. Did no one verify the branding ownership before tonight? Legal counsel. We were told all assets were developed in-house. Lucas Bain. You're launching a product using copyrighted material you don't even own. You expect us to keep funding this mess? Andrew. We can handle this. She doesn't want to fight. And then came Samantha's voice. Cool, razor sharp, cutting through the room like a scalpel. Samantha, recorded. Actually, she does. If you don't retract your branding materials and halt rollout by Monday, we file an injunction. By 11 p.m., TechVision's legal team had reached out to Samantha directly. They wanted to discuss options. But it was too late for damage control. The launch had already turned into a case study in corporate arrogance. Friday, 7:45 a.m. The headlines were everywhere. Launch party goes off script, CEO slammed for IP scandal. Tech Insider, branding crisis at TechVision. Former director files copyright claim. Daily Tech Digest. Woman fired days before launch shuts down entire rollout. Voxwire TechVision's stock dropped 6% before the market even officially opened. Meanwhile, my inbox was flooding. Recruiters, journalists, startups, old colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years. One message stood out. A personal note from Daniel Shaw's widow, Claire. Subject? He'd be proud of you. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my phone like it weighed 100 pounds. That simple sentence brought the tears I hadn't let fall during the meeting, the dismissal, or even the walkout. Because beneath all the strategy and planning, the legal protections and public posts, there was something deeper. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. By Monday morning, Tech Vision was in full damage control. The launch campaign, once scheduled to dominate tech headlines all week, was frozen. Their website had quietly reverted to the previous version. The new tagline, visual identity, and promotional assets were scrubbed clean. Social media channels posted vague messages about unexpected technical issues, while their PR team scrambled to respond to the growing avalanche of press inquiries. At 9:12 a.m., I received an email from a new name, Derek Lomax, the board-appointed crisis manager. Dear Ms. Turner, we respectfully request a meeting to explore options for resolution, including potential licensing or settlement of the disputed intellectual property. Please let us know your availability this week. Regards, Derek Lomax, Interim Vice President Strategy, Tech Vision. I forwarded the email to Samantha, who replied within minutes. Let them sweat. We'll respond tomorrow. You have more pressing things today. Are you ready? I was. At 10 a.m., I walked into the Midtown offices of Virotech, a rising AI firm that had been quietly gaining attention in our industry. A week ago, they had reached out, not just because of the scandal, but because they recognized the voice behind Tech Vision's most iconic work. I was offered a full creative leadership role, Vice President of Brand Strategy and Innovation, equity, full autonomy, and a team I could build from scratch. But the real draw? Their CEO, Aisha Rahman, had once been dismissed from a Fortune 500 company for being too bold. She understood. Our meeting began with no pleasantries. Just a handshake and a simple phrase from Aisha. You are brilliant. Let's make sure you get to keep being brilliant. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't defending my worth. I was defining it. After lunch, Samantha and I finally reviewed the terms we would propose to Tech Vision. They had two options. 1. Cease all use of the launch materials immediately, issue a public retraction, and pay damages. 2. License the materials, retroactively and moving forward under my ownership, for a significant sum and with public acknowledgement of my role. The second option was generous, all things considered. But we both knew Andrew Harper's ego would choke on the words public acknowledgement, which is exactly why we included it. By Tuesday morning, Tech Vision's board had gathered for another emergency session. An inside source leaked part of the meeting's discussion to Tech Insider. Their article, posted by noon, was damning. According to sources, CEO Andrew Harper failed to properly vet ownership of the company's new branding assets, leading to a public copyright dispute just hours after the product launch. Shareholders have expressed concern over Harper's handling of the situation and the potential legal costs now facing the company. The article didn't mention me by name, but it didn't have to. Everyone already knew. 10:43 a.m. Miguel. Andrew just got booted from today's strategy call. Board is furious. Rumor is he's being reassigned. 10:55 a.m. LinkedIn DM from Lucas Bain. Let me know when you're ready to talk. I think you've earned more than a new title. I didn't answer yet. I wasn't finished watching it all unfold. By Wednesday, Tech Vision released an official statement, finally acknowledging oversights in the development and attribution of creative materials related to the recent product launch. My name was mentioned, formally this time. A line buried at the bottom read, "We are currently working toward a resolution with Ms. Isabel Turner and her legal team." It wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. That afternoon, Aisha and I finalized my contract with Virotech. When the HR director asked if I wanted to post a formal hiring announcement right away, I smiled and said, let's wait until Friday. Because Friday marked exactly 1 week since the launch party. 1 week since Andrew raised a glass and called me deadweight. And I had one more surprise in store. Friday morning dawned bright, cool, and full of promise. Exactly 1 week since I'd stood in front of a room full of executives and handed Andrew Harper a gift he never saw coming. I arrived at Virotech's headquarters in my new role as Vice President of Brand Strategy and Innovation. The office was already humming with energy. Designers whiteboarding product concepts, marketers refining campaign timelines, engineers discussing rollout plans. It was a stark contrast to TechVision's culture of top-down orders and approval bottlenecks. Here, people moved with purpose, with respect. I set my bag down in my new office, larger than my old one, but less about status and more about space to think, and opened my laptop. Right on schedule, our carefully crafted announcement post went live on LinkedIn and across business media platforms. Virotech welcomes Isabel Turner as Vice President of Brand Strategy and Innovation. The post was polished but personal. It highlighted my 12-year track record at TechVision, credited me for leading their most successful campaigns, and announced the beginning of a new chapter, one rooted in transparency, collaboration, and visionary work. The final line read, "Because innovation deserves not just recognition, but protection." Within 30 minutes, it was trending. Hundreds of likes, dozens of supportive comments from former colleagues, fellow creatives, even a few old rivals who couldn't help but tip their hats. 9:34 a.m. Samantha, their general counsel, just called. They're ready to accept the licensing terms, including public attribution. Andrew officially stepped down this morning. Interim CEO is Richard Donovan. I leaned back in my chair, letting that settle. It had taken 7 days. 7 days to dismantle 12 years of being underestimated. 7 days to reclaim ownership of my work. 7 days for a company that once called me replaceable to admit, on paper, that they couldn't move forward without what I'd created. By mid-morning, tech media outlets had picked up the Virotech announcement. One particularly biting headline from TechScoop made me laugh out loud. From deadweight to director, Isabel Turner's launch week power play. I sent the link to Miguel, who responded within seconds. Miguel, officially turned in my resignation today, starting with Virotech on Monday. You were right, they never saw it coming. He wasn't alone. 2 other former team members from TechVision had reached out that week, asking if Virotech had openings. It did. And I was already working on integrating them into a project I'd been dreaming about for years, but never had the support to pursue. The very people who had been ignored, underpaid, and overlooked were now building something new. With me, not beneath me. At 12:15 p.m., a formal email arrived from TechVision's interim CEO, Richard Donovan. It was professional, dignified, and, most importantly, respectful. Dear Ms. Turner, I want to personally thank you for engaging with us during this challenging moment. On behalf of the board, I apologize for how your contributions were handled in the past. We have agreed to your licensing terms and will issue a public acknowledgement this afternoon. We've also initiated internal reviews to prevent this from happening again. I hope this resolution offers closure, and that your next chapter is filled with the recognition you've always deserved. Attached to the email was the draft of TechVision's public statement. They were acknowledging me by name, stating clearly that the creative direction for the original launch had been developed by me prior to my dismissal, that the company regretted failing to recognize my work and was now licensing the branding through my ownership. It was everything I had asked for, and more. Not because I wanted applause, because I wanted truth. At 3 p.m., the statement went live. Investors reacted favorably. Stability returned to their stock. But the internet had already chosen its hero. And it wasn't the guy who once toasted to letting go of dead weight. That evening, Aisha stopped by my office with 2 glasses and a bottle of champagne. "To justice served," she said, pouring. I raised my glass. "And to starting over stronger." As the sun dipped behind the skyline and our glasses clinked, I knew something deep in my bones. This wasn't just a win. It was a shift in how women in leadership are seen, in how intellectual work is valued, and in how silence is sometimes the loudest response of all. And yet, I still wasn't done. Because a victory is just a moment. What you do after is what makes it matter. 1 year later, I stood backstage at the National Women in Tech Leadership Summit, adjusting the microphone pinned to my collar. The host's voice echoed through the hall as she introduced me. Please welcome our keynote speaker, industry trailblazer, brand architect, and a voice for innovation with integrity, Isabel Turner. The applause was warm, familiar, deserved. I stepped into the light, passed the curtain, and looked out across a sea of faces: executives, entrepreneurs, students, engineers. Some I recognized, others I didn't. But many of them knew me, knew my story. A story that had become a cautionary tale in corporate boardrooms and a rallying cry in break rooms. A year ago today, I began, I was packing a cardboard box, not with regrets, but with memories, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I walked them through the truth of what happened. Not the headlines, not the sanitized company statements. The truth of how easily innovation is taken for granted, how loyalty is only valued when it's convenient, and how people like me, like many of them, are told to sit quietly while others take the credit. I was called dead weight, and I said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew my actions would speak louder than my anger ever could. The room was silent. This isn't just a story about copyright or a clever play at a launch party. It's about owning your work, your worth, your voice. Afterward, dozens of women, some barely out of college, some with decades of experience, lined up to speak with me. One whispered, "I started documenting everything after reading your story. I didn't realize I had rights." Another said, "My company just gave me credit for a product line I built after I reminded them how your situation played out." They weren't fangirling. They were awakening, and that mattered more than anything. The next week, I returned to Virotech for our quarterly strategy session. Miguel and 3 other former Tech Vision colleagues now sat around that table with me. We were finalizing a new campaign, something bold, deeply collaborative, and entirely original. No one was trying to outshine the others. No one was pretending to have all the answers. We built together, the way it was always meant to be. That afternoon, I received a sleek envelope at the front desk. No return address. Just my name, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Inside was a short handwritten note. "Congratulations on your success. The board speaks of you with respect now. They should have from the beginning. I've resigned. You were right. It was never just business." R. D. Richard Donovan, the interim CEO who had replaced Andrew. A man who, unlike his predecessor, had chosen humility over ego. He was stepping down now that Tech Vision had stabilized under new leadership. Their recovery had been slow, but deliberate. They'd licensed the branding package, publicly credited me in every investor document, and most recently, they had invited me to speak at their company retreat. I declined, not out of spite, but because I had finally moved on. Later that month, Aisha called me into her office at Virotech. She smiled as she handed me a single sheet of paper. "The board has approved your promotion. Effective immediately, you're now Chief Brand and Innovation Officer." I blinked. "That's exactly what you deserve," she said, standing. "You don't just build campaigns, Isabel. You build belief. In people, in purpose, in what's possible." I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just breathed. Because for the first time in my career, I wasn't fighting to prove my value. I was living in it. The next day, a new nameplate appeared outside my office door. I ran my fingers across the metal letters. Isabel Turner, CBIO. 12 years of being dismissed, sidelined, underestimated. And now? Now my name was exactly where it belonged. Not in the footnotes, not behind the scenes, but on the door, on the document, on the record, where everyone could see it, where no one could take it, where it would stay. I remember the first time I saw him. Maxwell Granger. He walked into the main office like he'd just been handed the world on a silver platter. Black tailored suit, Rolex gleaming, confidence dripping from every inch of his 6-foot frame, and not a single clue about what we actually did. "Call me Max," he said, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I like things lean, fast, and efficient. We're going to do great things, starting now." There was a beat of silence. Then the kind of forced clapping you only hear in company town halls and kindergarten performances. I stayed quiet, arms crossed. I'd been with Nexora Systems for nearly 9 years. I'd outlasted 2 CEOs, 4 restructurings, and a corporate buyout. I knew how to play the game. But Max, he was about to learn. The first week was chaos. Max canceled our regular project review meetings and replaced them with vision strategy syncs. He fired 3 mid-level managers by Thursday, 2 by email. Then he started making changes to our flagship software product, despite not understanding the system architecture. That product, by the way? I built it. 6 years ago, after a failed acquisition nearly tanked us, I designed a new back-end infrastructure. Streamlined, secure, scalable. And I didn't just design it. I patented the system under my name. A protective move encouraged by the previous CEO who said, "Emma, if you ever leave, we'll be begging you to come back." It was buried in my employment contract. Just another clause most execs never bother reading. But Max hadn't read a thing. By the second week, he started calling me tech lead, instead of my actual title, Director of Systems Architecture. Small insult, but telling. He avoided eye contact in meetings, interrupted me mid-sentence, and praised junior staff for ideas I'd already presented. Classic power play, demean, discredit, dismiss. I kept my cool. I always do. But I started documenting everything. Then came Friday morning. Max strolled into my office, leaned against the doorframe like he was starring in a bad corporate drama, and said, "Emma, can we talk?" I gestured toward the chair across from me. He didn't sit. "I'm going to be blunt," he said, in the tone men use when they think honesty is a favor. "You've been here a long time, maybe too long. Things are changing and we need people who move at a different pace." I raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning, I'm letting you go. Effective immediately. We've decided your position is redundant. You'll get a severance package, of course. HR has the paperwork." It was so rehearsed, so smug, I almost laughed. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and looked at him. Really looked at him. He had no idea. No idea what I owned. No idea what that one line in my contract meant. No idea that without me, without my explicit written consent, the company couldn't legally continue using the system running 82% of its operations. But I didn't say any of that. I just smiled. A calm, polite, deliberate smile. "Understood," I said, standing to shake his hand. He didn't take it. Just nodded and turned away like he was already done with me. As he walked out, he threw one last comment over his shoulder. "I'm not about to spend a dime on an incompetent employee who peaked 5 years ago." My smile didn't falter. "Good luck, Max." He paused at the door, probably confused by how calm I was. Then he left. I packed my things slowly, methodically. A few personal items. A plant I'd somehow kept alive for 5 years. A USB stick with nothing on it but photos from the last team offsite. As I walked through the open plan office, a few heads turned. Some people looked away, embarrassed. Others gave me small, sympathetic nods. No one said anything. That's how fear spreads in places like this. Quietly. By the time I got to my car, my hands were trembling. Not from sadness, from adrenaline. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was curious. How long until they realized what they'd done? I knew the answer. Monday. The weekend passed like a slow-brewing storm. Quiet, heavy, and laced with static. I didn't tell anyone I'd been fired. Not my sister, who always said I worked too hard. Not my best friend, who would have shown up with red wine and a 5-point revenge plan. And definitely not my ex-husband, who had once called me too intense and married to your work. I needed silence, space, perspective. Friday night, I went for a long walk around the city, past the quiet cafes and closed bookstores, letting the cold night air numb the sting of betrayal. I wasn't mourning the job. I was mourning the insult, the ignorance, The idea that someone who had never written a line of code could walk in, strip away years of sweat and sacrifice, and call it redundant. By Saturday morning, I was ready to work. I pulled out the contract from my personal files. It was all there, in black and white. The patent listed under my name. The clause, reviewed and notarized. A carefully worded section that gave me full rights over the architectural system I had built. Nexora had a licensing agreement for its use, one that required my explicit participation for renewal, updates, or scaling. And that agreement? It was due for renewal. Monday. I let out a small laugh. Not because it was funny, but because the timing was poetic. By 3 p.m., I'd sent an email to Nexora's legal department, not from my old company account, which had already been deactivated, but from my personal address. The subject line was simple. Notice of intellectual property usage expiration. Immediate attention required. I kept it factual. Calm. No drama. Just a reminder that, per our licensing agreement, the company's right to use the system would expire at midnight Sunday unless renegotiated directly with me, the patent holder. Failure to comply would constitute a breach of IP law, and continued use beyond that point would trigger legal consequences. I signed it formally, professionally. Emma Langford, inventor, Nexora Backend Architecture Vice, 2.3 patent number US 9347901B. I CC'd their legal counsel, our old CTO, and, yes, Max. Then I closed my laptop and went for a run. 4 miles through foggy side streets, dodging tourists and street vendors, feeling the tension bleed from my body. By Sunday afternoon, my phone had started to light up. 2 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. 1 voicemail from HR. Emma, we're hoping to clarify something regarding your separation agreement. Another from legal. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss terms of your prior agreement with the company. And finally, late that night, an email from Max himself. Subject: urgent. Contract. Misunderstanding. Emma, I believe there's been a miscommunication. I'd like to speak with you directly to clear the air and resolve this situation before business resumes Monday. Please call me ASAP. Max. There it was. The panic. I didn't respond. Let them stew. Let them come to work Monday morning and realize the entire company's infrastructure, the scheduling system, the CRM, the API integrations, the automated reporting, the client access portals, depended on a license they no longer had. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. And if it had to come in the form of panic emails and legal fire drills, so be it. By the time Monday arrived, I had already been up for hours. Coffee brewed, phone fully charged, laptop open. I sat on my couch in leggings and an oversized hoodie, watching the clock tick toward 8 a.m., the official start of the Nexora workday. At 8:07, my inbox exploded. System error. Backend authentication failed. Urgent. Clients cannot access dashboard. Emma, please call me, now. From Max. Then came a text. From Nicole, an old friend in product. Nicole, did you do this? Please tell me you did this. Max is losing it. Whole system's down. Meetings canceled. Clients calling nonstop. The board's been looped in. I smiled. Not out of malice. Out of clarity. This wasn't sabotage. This was what happened when people in power assumed competence without proof and dismissed value without understanding it. At 8:31, my phone rang. This time, I answered. Emma? Max's voice cracked through the speaker, forced calm layered over full-blown panic. We need to talk. I had no idea about the patent situation. Let's get you back in the office and... I cut him off gently. I'm happy to talk, Max, but not about a job. We're discussing licensing now, as an external partner. Silence. Emma? He said again, voice lower. Let's not make this personal. Oh, I replied. It's not personal. It's contractual. Then I hung up. And just like that, the real negotiation began. I walked into the Nexora building at 9:12 a.m. on Monday morning. Not through the back employee entrance, but through the front lobby. My heels echoed across the marble floor, crisp and deliberate, the sound unfamiliar to me after years of slipping in unnoticed with a travel mug and laptop bag. This wasn't a return. It was a reintroduction. The receptionist blinked when she saw me. "Ms. Langford?" I smiled. "I have a meeting with legal." She nodded quickly, clearly unsure of what was happening, and picked up the phone. Her hand trembled just slightly as she dialed. I could feel the energy in the room shift. The way people paused mid-conversation, the glances from employees pretending not to look. "Take the elevator to the 7th floor," she said. "They're waiting." As I stepped in and the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored panel. Confident. Unshaken. But beneath the surface, my heart was thudding. Not with fear, with focus. I'd spent the weekend preparing for this moment, not just to defend my work, but to define my value. When I entered the legal conference room, the tone was cautious. The company's general counsel stood up to greet me, followed by 2 members of the internal legal team and a senior advisor I recognized from an old merger. Max was not there. I took a seat at the far end of the table. Let them come to me. "Emma," the general counsel began, his voice smooth but clipped. "We appreciate you coming in. We want to get ahead of this and resolve things amicably." "Of course," I replied. "I'm all for clean resolutions. I assume you've reviewed the licensing agreement?" He nodded. "We have. Your claims are valid. The system patent is registered under your name, and per the agreement, continued use without your consent constitutes a violation." "And the renewal date?" "Expired at midnight, as stated." There was a pause. Then he leaned forward. "We'd like to propose a retroactive licensing extension. 1 year. Same terms, full operational access." I smiled. "That won't work for me." A murmur passed around the room. The advisor scribbled something in a notebook. "I'm not here to return to the same terms," I continued calmly. "I'm here to renegotiate, fairly. You're currently experiencing downtime, correct?" They hesitated. "I've been told it's affecting all client-facing platforms, internal reporting, and developer access." The general counsel finally nodded. "Yes." "So let's talk numbers," I said. "I want $1.2 million for the next 12 months. Non-exclusive, renewable quarterly. Full system support through me directly or a consulting team I approve. And a public acknowledgement of the patent in company documentation." It wasn't a bluff. It was a market-aligned figure based on the system's reach and impact. The silence in the room told me they hadn't expected me to walk in prepared. Not like this. One of the legal associates cleared her throat. "That's a significant increase. It's reflective of value, something this company has forgotten how to measure." The general counsel leaned back in his chair. "We'll need to take this to the board." "I'll wait," I said simply. "But just so you know, each hour of delay affects client trust, your reputation, your stock trajectory. I'd advise moving quickly." They didn't argue. At 10:03 a.m., as I waited outside the conference room with a bottle of water and my phone on silent, I spotted Max pacing the hallway just beyond the glass. He hadn't seen me yet. When he finally did, his expression froze. Then it shifted, first to confusion, then to something else. Recognition. He walked toward me, his steps slower than usual, controlled. "Emma," he said, his voice forced into civility. "I didn't expect you'd come in person." "No, Max," I replied evenly. "You didn't expect a lot of things." "I think this has gone too far," he started, hands in pockets, trying for casual. "We should have had a conversation before lawyers got involved." "You mean before you fired me?" I raised an eyebrow. "That decision was based on incomplete information." "No," I said, standing. "That decision was based on ego. And now you're dealing with the consequences." He opened his mouth again, but I didn't give him the chance. "I'm not angry, Max. I'm simply done being underestimated. I've documented everything. The patent, the licensing terms, your email firing me without cause. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to negotiate. If you want to salvage this deal and maybe your job, you'll let legal do their work. His jaw tensed. I walked past him, back toward the meeting room. Oh, and Max? I said, turning over my shoulder. Good luck. That word again. Luck, something I never needed. By noon, the conference room was full again. Only this time, the energy was different. Tighter. Sharper. The board hadn't joined, but I could feel their presence looming behind every word the legal team spoke. The stakes had changed. What was once a miscommunication was now a legal crisis with operational fallout and stockholder implications. I didn't flinch. The general counsel sat directly across from me. He looked less polished than earlier. Tie loosened, jaw clenched. We've reviewed your proposal, he began, measured. And while we find the terms aggressive, accurate, I corrected. He paused, nodded. Accurate. We're prepared to accept the licensing rate with a caveat. 6-month contract. Renewable quarterly, as you suggested. Public acknowledgement. We'd prefer to phrase it as technical collaboration rather than a full patent credit. I leaned forward. No. His brows lifted. Excuse me? I want it stated clearly and publicly. System designed and patented by Emma Langford. No spin, no sanitized language. The company ran on my architecture for 6 years, and you've all benefited from it. I'm not walking away nameless so Max can save face. The room stilled. The associate to the left glanced at her notes but didn't speak. The advisor scribbled something again. The general counsel adjusted his glasses. We'll take that to the board. Do that. I stood, gathering my folder. And while you're at it, I'd advise transparency. The SEC doesn't take kindly to unreported licensing conflicts that impact system functionality. That landed like a hammer, because that's the game no one likes to admit in public. How a single systems failure, especially due to intellectual property misuse, can shake investor confidence, trigger audits, or worse, lead to delisting threats. I knew their playbook better than they thought. And now, I had my own. As I walked out into the corridor, I spotted Nicole again, this time in a corner near the elevators. She gave me a look, half shock, half admiration. They're calling you the firewall upstairs, she said with a grin. I smiled faintly. Better than being called redundant. She laughed, then lowered her voice. People are talking, Emma. Max is in full spin mode. Telling the board it was all a misunderstanding, claiming you never disclosed the licensing expiration. That's a lie, I said calmly. But let him talk. Truth doesn't need volume. Nicole leaned closer. Everyone saw the memo. You CC'd legal before the deadline. There's paper everywhere. The interns are whispering about it like it's Watergate. I didn't reply right away. My mind was already moving ahead, to the second wave. Because reclaiming control wasn't enough, I wanted accountability. The next morning, I sent a follow-up email. Not to legal, not to Max, but directly to the board chair, using the address I'd quietly kept from an old initiative we'd collaborated on years ago. The subject line was short. System licensing, public statement, and leadership conduct. I was respectful, concise, factual. I outlined the scope of the patent and its operational necessity, the termination and licensing conflict timeline, Max's decision to fire a key systems architect without reviewing internal IP obligations, the false narrative he was now pushing. I closed with a simple question. If this is how he handles internal resources, how do you expect him to manage external partners, vendors, or regulators? By that afternoon, the response came, not from the chair, but from a senior board liaison. Emma, thank you for your clarity and professionalism. Please know that we take this seriously. We'll be reviewing the matter internally with all documentation you've provided. In the meantime, we support the licensing arrangement and expect it to be finalized within 48 hours under the terms you've proposed. We regret that the company's leadership did not recognize your contribution sooner. I stared at the message for a moment, then leaned back in my chair, It wasn't a public apology, but it was a shift. Not just in the narrative, but in the power dynamic. Later that night, I got a message from Nicole again. Nicole, Max is freaking out. The board's meeting early tomorrow. His assistant said he's been calling in favors, trying to control the story. I typed back slowly. Me. Let him try. I've got the truth. And a paper trail longer than his resume. The next day would be more than a license deal. It would be a reckoning. The board met at 9 a.m. sharp on Wednesday morning. By 9:23, I was looped in. Not by Max, not by legal, but by the board chair himself. The email was brief, but the tone was clear. Please join us for a closed session at 11 o'clock. Your insight will be valuable to the ongoing discussion. That word again, valuable. 2 weeks ago, I was incompetent. Now I was valuable. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so revealing. At 10:55 a.m., I entered the executive boardroom on the top floor of the Nexora building, a room I'd only stepped into once before, years ago, when presenting a system upgrade roadmap with the previous CEO. Back then, I stood in the corner, unnoticed. Today, I walked straight to the chair reserved for me. No hesitation. Max was already seated on the opposite side, arms crossed, phone face down on the table like a prop he wasn't allowed to touch. His tie was perfect, his smile rehearsed. But the worry in his eyes? That wasn't staged. The board chair opened the session with formalities, then turned to me. Emma, thank you for joining. We've reviewed the licensing terms and your documentation. We'd like to hear your perspective, briefly, before we deliberate. I nodded. Of course. I stood, unfolded my notes, but didn't read from them. Instead, I looked each board member in the eye and said, leadership is not about control. It's about clarity, about knowing the systems that power your company, technical or human. When a new executive enters a system they don't understand, they have two choices: listen or bulldoze. Max chose the latter. Max shifted in his seat but didn't interrupt. He called me incompetent, fired me without a review, then ignored the legal implications of the infrastructure he relied on to keep the company running. What's worse, he only started listening after a failure, after the servers went dark and clients started calling. I let that sit. Everything I did, every system I built was designed to protect this company. But no system can protect you from arrogance. And if your CEO doesn't understand the architecture of your operations or the value of the people behind them, you're not just at risk legally. You're at risk fundamentally. Silence. Then one board member leaned forward. What would you do if you were in his seat? I smiled, just slightly. I wouldn't be in his seat. I'd be beside someone who understands product, culture, and legal. I'd build a leadership model that values collaboration over control. And I wouldn't wait for a lawsuit to start respecting the people who keep this place standing. There was a pause. Then the chair cleared his throat. Thank you, Emma. You can wait outside while we deliberate. I stood, nodded to each of them, and left the room. 10 minutes later, I heard raised voices through the wall. Not mine, Max's. He was unraveling, deflecting, blaming legal, the CTO, even HR. That was his last play. Shift the blame until it evaporates. But this time, it didn't work. At 11:47 a.m., the board chair stepped out. Emma, we've concluded our session. We'd like to speak with you again. Privately. I followed him back inside. This time, Max was gone. The chair sat down and folded his hands on the table. Effective immediately, he said. Maxwell Granger has been placed on administrative leave pending formal review. We'll be issuing a revised statement to staff, clarifying the situation and publicly recognizing your contribution to Nexora's infrastructure and recovery. He handed me a printed draft of the official message. I read the first line aloud. We acknowledge Emma Langford's leadership, innovation, and intellectual property as vital to Nexora's success. It hit me harder than I expected. Not because I needed the recognition, but because I knew how many women in tech never got it. How would you like to proceed? The chair asked. I've already agreed to the licensing, I said, but I'd also like to offer consulting. Short term. No full-time return. I want autonomy, and I want to help you build protections so this never happens to anyone else. He nodded. Consider it done. I stood, and as I turned to leave, he added, Emma? Yes? You didn't just protect the system. You saved the company. I gave a soft nod. I know. As I walked out of the room, the weight that had clung to me for days began to lift. Not all at once, but in pieces. Like armor I didn't need anymore. In the hallway, Nicole was waiting. He's gone? She whispered. I smiled. He's suspended, for now. And you? I looked down the corridor toward the glass walls of the floor I used to work on. I'm just getting started. The internal announcement went live at 2:03 p.m. on Friday. Effective immediately, Maxwell Granger has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into recent management decisions, including termination procedures and contractual oversight. Nexora Systems also formally acknowledges Emma Langford as the architect of our core infrastructure. Her patent and licensing terms are now part of our official operating agreement. We are grateful for her continued partnership and leadership through this transition. The message was simple. But inside the company, it hit like a thunderclap. By the time I left the building that day, the silence in the hallways had turned into cautious smiles, quick nods, murmured, congrats from people who hadn't made eye contact with me in weeks. It wasn't vindication I was after. It was acknowledgement. And more than that, it was change. The following Monday, I met with legal again. This time, not as a crisis point, but to propose a new framework. A system that would safeguard internal innovations and protect employees from leadership malpractice. It included automatic IP contract reviews during leadership transitions, anonymous whistleblower reporting tied directly to board oversight, a mentorship program for junior engineers focused on ownership, credit, and boundary setting. I didn't want to just leave with a win. I wanted to leave something behind. Within a week, the consulting agreement was finalized. I would stay on for 90 days, helping stabilize the system post-panic and prepare the next lead architect to take over. My terms, my pace. People still asked me if I was coming back full-time. The answer was always no, because even though I loved the work, the company had changed. And so had I. One afternoon, 2 weeks into my new role, I stood outside the building after a long meeting and noticed a group of interns walking by. One of them, a young woman with thick glasses and a nervous smile, paused when she saw me. Are you Emma Langford? She asked. I nodded. Her face lit up. I just wanted to say thank you. What you did, it's kind of legendary. We talk about it all the time in the Slack channels. You made it okay for people to speak up. I smiled, genuinely. Then keep speaking up, I said. Don't wait for permission. She nodded and jogged to catch up with her group, leaving me with a strange feeling. Not pride exactly. Something deeper. Legacy. That weekend, I finally allowed myself to exhale. I took a train out of the city, switched off my phone, and watched the world blur past the window. For the first time in months, my mind wasn't looping strategy or contingency plans. Just silence. Peace. That night, I journaled for the first time since this all began. One line stood out. I was never asking for power. I was asking for recognition. And when they couldn't give me that, I made my own table instead of begging for a seat at theirs. In the weeks that followed, news trickled out. Max's leave became permanent. The official language cited irreconcilable leadership differences. There were whispers about other complaints, other terminations swept under the rug before mine. The company's culture began to shift, slowly but visibly. Exit interviews were being restructured. Internal training now included IP awareness. And for the first time, credit attribution was baked into engineering milestones. A few execs tried to rewrite the story. Emma was always part of the team, one said on a panel. We've always valued her expertise. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. The people who mattered knew the truth. So did the code. The architecture I built still held, and my name was finally where it belonged, on the system, in the credits, and in the story. Months later, I received a handwritten letter from the board chair. Emma, you changed how we think about leadership, not by fighting, but by standing firm. Thank you for showing us what real authority looks like. David. I kept it in the same drawer where I'd once stored my severance papers, a reminder of where I'd started and where I refused to end. Today, I lead my own consulting firm. I work with companies who want more than flashy leadership. They want sustainable systems and empowered people. I choose my clients carefully. I set my own boundaries. And I never sign anything without reading the fine print. Because in the end, this story wasn't about revenge. It was about value, visibility, and the quiet, steady strength of someone who refused to disappear when the system tried to erase her. So to anyone out there who's ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or labeled difficult for simply knowing their worth, here's my advice. You don't need to shout to make an impact. You just need to know who you are and never hand that power over to someone who doesn't. Because when they fire you thinking they've silenced you, all they've really done is light the match.